We're delighted that you're joining us this lunchtime for our second episode in our three-part series, looking into the do's and don'ts for utilising data to build customer trust. In today's session, our panelists will be discussing how to manage data in ways that help to close the trust gap and create mutually beneficial long-term relationships between a brand and a customer. So let's kick off. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. We've got a really interesting mix of people joining us today. We'll be hearing from Ricky Knox, who is the founder of Tandem Bank, Rob Murphy, who is VP for Go-to-Market at mParticle, and Mario Meir-Huber, who is Head of Data at Uniqa Insurance Group. So I'll now hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their role. So let's start with Mario.
Yeah, hi Tori, and thanks for inviting me to this webinar. So as mentioned by you, I'm working for Uniqa Insurance Group. For those not familiar with Uniqa, we are basically operating in Central and Eastern Europe. We are working in 17 countries, have 20,000 employees, and roughly 6 billion euros of insurance turnover. So we are one of the largest insurance companies in CEE. And yes, so basically our challenges are that we are working in a heavily regulated environment, on the one hand side, the financial services industry, and that we are a multinational organization, which is heavily decentralized. We are acquiring companies, insurance companies in CEE on a yearly basis. So the integration efforts are big. And yes, as it's a large company, the decentralized aspect of data is very challenging for us.
Really interesting. I'm sure we'll get into more of the detail on that through the discussion. And thank you, Mario. And Ricky.
Hi there, guys. Nice to meet you. Ricky Knox, founder of Tandem Bank. We're a new digital bank taking an innovative approach to data and data management. And my role there, while I was CEO until the summer, while I wasn't sort of directly managing data, I was very involved with our data strategy and what that did to promote competitive advantage for Tandem. Nice to see you all. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Ricky. And Rob, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm Rob. I lead mParticle's go-to-market teams in EMEA. So you might not have heard about mParticle before, but you may have benefited from some of the personalized experiences that you've received with brands like M&S, Gymshark, KFC, and many, many others. So I'm passionate about scaling technology organizations that have been doing this for longer than I might like to admit, everything from Series C all the way up to Fortune 100. And really, over the past 12 years, I've been working with large B2C brands like Spotify, Klarna, Disney, and many others to help essentially simplify the flow of customer data between systems and applications, breaking down data silos and ultimately improving customer experiences.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's begin. Mario, we heard that you're from a large multinational organization, and Ricky, you're from the startup world. So could you tell us a bit about your individual data strategies and how you think they're kind of different, or what the similarities are from the startup world to the multinational corporate world? Mario.
Okay, so basically based on our data strategy, it's as we are heavily decentralized, it's also the data strategy is really decentralized. So we have individual parts of the organization using data. We have different countries using data in a different aspect, as the markets are somewhat different and the products are different. So this is the one hand side, and we of course can only work from, like, I'm in headquarters reporting to the management board, but we have to ensure that we have some certain barriers set where our operating companies or operating countries can work with data, so that they have some barriers set, like the architecture must be a given, so they should adhere to a common architecture, they should adhere to common governance. This is what we're working on. So it's like giving the guidance, but giving the flexibility for countries and business units to operate. If we would just do it from a centralized team, we would slow down the entire organization heavily because we couldn't react fast to market demands, which are very specific. So our approach to data is that it's heavily business driven and that it needs to happen in the business, and that business needs to own the data. That business eventually needs to drive everything around data. We as a board level unit, we must ensure that business can operate. So this is basically our strategy, that we are going really into the enablement, having the best people, and having certain things set. So it's working from an abstract point of view and translating that to business demands and to country demands.
Fantastic, thank you. And Ricky, how does that compare to the data strategy that you built at Tandem?
It's interesting. I mean, Tandem did have the opportunity to build a centralized data structure and data strategy. Although it's interesting in that, I sympathize with some of the challenges that Mario's experienced, even within a relatively small organization, with a sort of £500 million balance sheet. So at Tandem, we built one unified data architecture with a data lake that essentially any data recipients were more or less forced to contribute their data in there, and then with a team of data analysts who are pulling out functions, pulling out essentially processed data from what is a completely unstructured data lake. And then we had a QA layer, modeling layer, and a sort of AI control layer sat over the top of that. All of those then serviced the needs of the different departments. So, for example, within the modeling layer, there's a sort of credit array, fraud array, AML array to allow those different departments to analyze things. Interestingly, what that required in terms of usability is that there are two teams. There's a data science team, which were central, but then there was the analyst teams were actually distributed. So anytime somebody wanted to actually access the data and pull out a different data set from the data lake, that actually required analytic skills. It wasn't sort of drag and click because the data lake wasn't structured, and therefore that those teams were actually put into each of the sort of data user groups. So the credit team had a data analyst, the finance team had a data analyst, there were even the ops team had a data analyst. So across the business, everyone had their own person who was in charge of accessing it there, and that did allow us to run a centralized, very, very tightly managed data organization and data control, data governance, while actually allowing the users to use that. But even then, from time to time, there were tensions where, Mario, I'm reflecting on sort of people downloading sort of huge data files onto their local PC and then complaining when the results weren't perfect, which didn't get very much sympathy from me or the data guys. But the truth is that type of structure, centralized structure, becomes very difficult to manage over a few hundred people. And even then, even a few hundred people at Tandem, there were challenges from time to time. But it does allow for more data consistency and cleaner governance, tighter governance of the data.
Fantastic, thank you. And Rob, does this resonate? How do you work with your customers? Do you kind of advise them on a centralized or decentralized strategy? And what do you think of what Mario and Ricky have said?
Yeah, it's like super interesting points and different viewpoints as well. I think what's interesting is there's no, silver bullet really for any organization. It's always going to depend on the culture of the organization, the stacks that they have in place, and indeed what their goals are in future. I mean, one interesting example that we've had in the past has been Airbnb. Obviously, as an organization, they've been through quite significant change in the last 18 months. But essentially, they wanted to continue to focus on delivering top-notch host and guest bookings in order to essentially expand their user base. And to do that, they wanted to make sure they improving, personalized communications, interactions, and being able to ultimately give a better experience to their customer. But what we were kind of helping them to do was to leverage their first party data to create those personalized experiences across the different touch points. And ultimately the goal was to democratize access to its customer data. So if you were in the marketing team, you were in the growth team, you had access to the same customer data set, and you're ultimately able to stop those endless data shipping cycles where marketer wants to run a campaign, they log a ticket, it goes to a data engineering team, and that takes a couple of weeks to respond, and it just slows down the innovation that they're able to produce. So yeah, we've seen both approaches, both centralized and individual, like squads, if you will. And I mean, both have their pros and cons, like most things.
Fantastic, thank you. And so, Ricky, when you started at Tandem, it was a brand new organization, new business. So how did you go about building trust with customers so that they were comfortable sharing data with the business, to get that kind of first party data that Rob's mentioned?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, this was a particular challenge for us, and it was actually a sort of big risk when we're coming into our business model, because when we first started, and indeed, actually, there was a middle period where this wasn't the case, but latterly as well, in order for a customer to sign up to Tandem, they had to share their open banking data. And at the end of that's because what the app did before we launched our banking products was analyzed your finances, and so we needed to understand your finances in order to analyze them. But then we actually included it part of the compulsory sign-up process for the app and the savings account later on as well. And when we first came in, we were concerned that people, wouldn't want to share all of their, banking transactions with Tandem, which is a brand they'd not heard of, or maybe had sort of peripherally heard of. But what we found was a couple of different things. The first thing is by emphasizing the fact that we were a licensed bank, which we were by that time, that made a big difference. I think, I'm not sure a lot of people understand exactly what a bank license is or means, but I think, most people get that it's a difficult thing to get, and therefore it confers some trust in of itself. Or what it is really just a license to take deposits, and therefore by extension membership of the FSCS, the government's guarantee of your deposits up to about 85 grand. That's basically all a banking license itself really does for you. There's lots of other licenses you can get as a non-bank as well. But so I think that licensing piece was a big part of trust, but we did find that over time, after about, so when we reintroduced it as compulsory, our rates, admittedly our journeys had got better, but our rates of sort of dropout at the point at which we asked people to share their all their details when we first started were north of 50%, and by the time we came back and put that in later on, they were down nearer 30%. Now that could have been the sort of brand awareness, B, the fact that we had been established in the banking market for some time, and certainly if you've been a saver, would be near the top of the tables, for a couple of years at that point. If you were watching those things, you would have got used to Tandem sitting in those positions. So I think there is an element of trust build there, but there was also a simple piece of UX, and just making sure you're clear with the customer, what the benefit exchange is. They're giving you your data, what are they going to get for it? And I think we could be also more specific about that once we're talking about a savings account. You could get a high rate of interest, which customers felt was an adequate reward. Interestingly, when we weren't near the top of the table, we actually had significantly lower conversion rates in terms of open banking logon. So where customers felt that the value trade-off wasn't good enough, i.e. weren't the best rate or nearly the best rate, less people were willing to share their data. So it was very interesting. The short answer was people are willing to share, but not everybody, which I think is sort of slightly obvious, but useful learning at the time.
Really interesting. And Mario, in insurance, how do you approach this?
So basically, I think what's challenging for us in terms of data management in insurance is, again, this highly distributed way of sharing data. So we have different markets, and we have markets which are I would say, complex in terms of dealing with data. So we are active in Russia, where the challenges are different than the ones we have in Europe. So it's very tough to build a common strategy, I would say. So how to manage data and how to, like, what has changed is again, we moved towards this distributed approach, so that the countries have the freedom of doing things in terms of collecting data and what kind of data they need to collect. So we have to fulfill different regulatory approaches in different countries. So we do have, I would say, a large part of our footprint is in EU countries, where we have one common law, basically, from the European Central Bank, where we have to fulfill all the requirements. However, then we have non-EU countries. They are the minority, though, but still storing data, accessing data is different. For instance, in Russia, we simply cannot leave the data outside of Russia. It must stay there, which basically means that cloud is not an option in Russia. So we had to find solutions to tackle this problem. And same applies to other countries. We are active in so many other countries which are not yet or not scheduled to become part of the union. So we have different legislation there, which we had to tackle. We have different regulatory authorities to work with. This gave us a lot of headache, I would say.
Okay. And Rob, what kind of advice do you have for your customers who are looking to build customer trust, particularly perhaps with, organizations that might be working in multiple different regions and with lots of different regulatory frameworks?
Yeah, I think, like, to Richie's point, a lot of it will come down to what is that value exchange that we're getting. So they are sharing their personal identifiable information with you. So what value are you giving them in return? I think, like, for the most part, it boils down to pretty simple things. I just know who I am as an individual and serve me a great experience based on the data that I've shared with you. So I think as people get inundated with those cookie pop-ups, so like if you're going to accept that you want to be tracked on that website, like, use that for the benefit of the customer and continue to almost create little small value exchanges throughout the process in order to ultimately build up a better view of the customer, so you can provide better personalized experiences over time.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've talked a bit about the kind of regulatory environment. Of course, there's also multiple customer communication channels and omnipresent data gathering. So how can organizations be sure that all the data they're gathering is being stored safely? Mario, should we start with you on that one?
Yeah, how can we ensure that data is stored safely and once it's gathered? I mean, this is a tricky process, of course. I mean, we are working closely with security. So we have a dedicated chief data protection officer looking at the different aspects of safety of data. It's not just the physical safety, like is it stored safe in terms of, is it durable? What happens if it fails? Is it backup able and stuff like that? But also about the question of, is it legally correct how it is being stored? So we do have complex processes in place as we are heavily regulated. I would say we have a really high standard of safety, and we have tough processes that needs to be followed before things go into production. So I think it's simply important to have this overall governance in place to make sure that you have the physical safety of your data, that you have the legal safety of your data, that you have all the privacy aspects respected and accepted. So safety is a very multi-dimensional approach, and we are working with that closely. I mean, every bank, every insurance has a really strong risk department, and the risk department is also tackling the data protection within our company. So we have heavy guidelines there, working closely with the risk department on how we are going to store it, not just store it, but also how to process it and what's legally correct to do. So there we are building standards and processes within our organization. Basically our feedback, or what we learned out of that, is that once you have this in place, once you have a go-to consulting area within a large organization that can help you with that, safety and security is not a blocker, because a lot of companies I've been working with in my previous jobs, those like always, okay, now comes security and now all the innovation and the projects are being stopped, which is not the fact. Ensure it's helping us to stay secure and to bring things into production fast. So this is, we're treating safety and security from integrating it at the very, very beginning of whatever we do with data.
Fantastic. And Ricky, how about your experience at Tandem?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, you know, actually, this is probably one of those areas where I have more in common with what Mario's discussed. So yeah, not a lot more to add there.
Okay, fantastic. So our members often tell us that a common pitfall they encounter when trying to implement a data transformation project is that their data sits in hard to reach silos. Does this resonate at all, Ricky, with your experience?
That one to me. I mean, less so for us. I mean, I think that certainly in companies prior to Tandem, I've had a lot of challenges, particularly when you're running a multinational business. Actually bringing everything together is a real challenge. Although, you know, we were lucky at Tandem to essentially have all the data in one place, and you know, as I think we discussed earlier, that has cost and disadvantages, but the benefit is that ultimately everything is QA'd to the same standard and ultimately has the same level of meta tagging, and the same, you have the same level of understanding about the provenance of the data, the quality of the data, and that's all sort of marked and made. So I think the silo problem wasn't a problem at Tandem, but the centralization came with other disadvantages.
Brilliant, thank you. And Rob, thinking about this challenge around silos, is that something that you encounter quite often with your customers, and how do you work with them to overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, almost every customer that we speak to has a challenge around data silos, period. So, I mean, essentially what they're trying to do is unlock that so they can really share the information across the team. But I think it's important, not just unlocking the data silos, but as you start to bring data sets together, we need to ensure that we've got some form of data quality management and identity resolution in place as well. Otherwise, if we're collecting that data in from all these different silos into a single source, maybe creating a single customer view, and then using that single customer view to feed downstream advertising tools, analytics tools, marketing tools, etc. It's absolutely imperative that we make sure that the data going into all those tools is accurate. Otherwise, we can just end up in a state of like entropy, where everything's just getting worse and worse and worse because we're sending bad data downstream to various other tools. So I think it's a combination of, yes, bring these silos together, but doing so in a very measured and well thought out fashion.
Yeah, there's a challenge there, and sorry to interrupt, which is one of the things we found difficult was we had a lot of marketing data dumped in the lake, and the marketing data was ultimately of sort of relatively low quality. So it might have been scraped from the web, it might have been from various different places. And that didn't mean it wasn't useful to the marketing guys, but it meant it was very, very unuseful for the credit guys. So we had to carefully tag the reliability of that data. And then when that data was being tested and consumed against, for example, a credit model, you had to be really clear, A, that it wasn't, discriminatory in any way, B, that it was of a certain level of certainty, because you can't go and make credit assumptions on the basis that you ran into some data on the web somewhere about somebody, and you haven't got any verification from the customer. So that was a challenge actually with having it in one place rather than in silos, which is you had to have quite a lot of granularity around that tagging. Otherwise a model will consume it in the wrong way.
I could probably talk about silos for hours, but I don't want to bore people too much because, as you can imagine, we are like Uniqa has been around for decades. I think we started in 1900 something, so pretty long-lasting company, and the insurance business is pretty old. So we do have our mainframes, which are often being accessed by COBOL. So when we want to squeeze out the data from our COBOL systems, which still like from our mainframes, we still have to tackle that with COBOL. I mean, this is painful because try finding people being capable of programming COBOL nowadays. We even have issues finding people who are capable of programming Python or Java. So find someone with COBOL knowledge. So that's the problem with silos we have. We do have the data, we know roughly where it is, but how to squeeze it out of these systems which have no APIs because it was never thought of like 30 years ago. And replacing all these legacy systems is something which is so costly. So we have hundreds of silos and we can just tackle them one by one. So I think the problem we have with the silos is we see two different speeds in the company. The one speed is what IT can deliver. IT can deliver integrating like the interfaces to the silos at a certain speed because the people that can do it are really limited and they are getting less and less because they are going into retirement. So this is the one side, and then we have the business demand. So we see like until an interface is being created, that business is starting creating their own silos. So as soon as we try to like eliminate the silos by integrating them into a central system, we see new silos being created. So the approach we started doing is going for the data mesh, where we are building data products just to ensure that whenever a silo is being built, that the silo is built with a certain governance and with a certain API around it so that we make the data connectable. Because the reality is we can never stop silos. Because as soon as we start to integrate silos in a central system, in a company like us, we'll just new silos will be created on the way because we will always be too slow to tackle this and to destroy the silos. So that's why we started going this way, that we build a really strict governance around it. So that's how we should basically use it from a governance point of view.
Really interesting. Thank you, Mario. And Rob, Mario talked a bit there about legacy systems. How do you go about supporting customers who might have kind of legacy systems in place or old versions of codes that, you know, people that the staff can no longer interpret and that kind of thing? How do you support customers with that and with mParticle products?
Yeah, I mean, it's some things we'll be able to support, some things we probably won't, right? Trying to get real-time APIs into a legacy mainframe is going to be super difficult, right? So it's all about just working with the customer. And it's also about like, do we need, for the purposes of what you're going to use mParticle for, like what data do you actually need in order to run a campaign? So it's not saying like, you know, let's just bring absolutely everything from all these different silos in. Let's just really diligent on what data we're going to bring in, what purpose we're going to use it for, because there's no real value in just creating multiple copies of data throughout various different silos. So I think it's a combination of just working with the teams. Obviously, the legacy stuff is more difficult. The newer things like iOS, Android, and web are obviously a lot easier with modern day SDKs. But yeah, it's just about working with the customer, understanding what they're actually trying to achieve by bringing the data out of that silo, and then just figuring out the best way to do it. And sometimes it might even be as crude as CSV uploads through SFTPs.
By FTP, what?
Yeah. I would say it's rare.
That's reality
Yeah.
at some point. Yeah, I saw lots of projects where it was like, okay, let's just upload a freaking CSV server this term to the FTP.
Yeah, like I mean, Richard mentioned it earlier on. Like some of the marketing data that's coming through from the website could be super useful. I mean, one of the first use case that a lot of our customers will execute on is real-time ad suppression. So if they're making certain actions on sites, we can suppress them if they've gone and subscribed in real time, and they've saved, you know, quite often north of 10-15% on marketing and spend efficiency. So I think it's about like, you know, real time is great for real time use cases like that, but like sometimes, you know, maybe daily updates are good enough, but based on the use case that they're trying to underpin. So I think it's just finding a balance, right, before
Exactly.
we try and get everything going too fast.
Okay, brilliant. So even with the best strategies and technologies in place, something we haven't really talked that much about yet is employee buy-in. So how can organizations cultivate a culture in which data management is everyone's responsibility? Ricky, perhaps we'll start with you when you were starting out and thinking about how to build your culture.
This is a really interesting one, because obviously we had a DPO, a data protection officer, and we actually, what we did was we had these sort of data ambassadors across each of the teams. And interestingly, we made these super junior team members, and it sounds like an odd way round to do it, but essentially, they were given the responsibility of first of all sort of taking teams to task if they weren't actually looking after data governance properly, but also reporting on it regularly. And what we found was when we tried to give it to more senior people, it was just such a side of desk activity that people basically just didn't get around to it, and they were late on the reporting, and it was all that stuff because it's like. So for some people, whereas if you gave it to a sort of more junior member, for example, in the finance team, there was one, the data ambassador was, really an accounts clerk but they took it very seriously because it was an additional responsibility. It was named in their job description, and they were assessed when it came to, reviews and bonus on that, as well as their, sort of day job. And we found that was quite effective because these guys would, as long as you have the right and adequately vocal person, they would pipe up on data governance issues, in the team meetings and when these were relevant, and do a reasonably good job of making sure that and that the reports filled in on time, etc. I mean, I can't say that could work for everybody, but it was. We found it more effective than sort of sending it top down, like a sort of strategy, instruction that would sort of come down through the management team and filter out into the teams through sort of normal accountability system. But yeah, I'd be curious to know how the other guys managed it, because it's definitely not easy to get people to actually participate in the sort of data governance process.
I mean, that's. I think the cultural transformation is 90% of the job. It's not the technical transformation. It's the cultural transformation. And transforming a company at the size of 20,000 people, where people have so dedicated job functions, hyper specialized job functions, is really, really tough. So we have like our actuaries, which are working with data on a daily basis, which are working with advanced modeling and really sophisticated modeling, and telling them now how to do the job different is something which is really, really challenging. So I would say psychology is a key knowledge when working with data, because you need to know about how people are and how you can convince people, how you can win them over to go for new approaches like data governance, not to have messy data around, not to accept messy data, but to have data at a certain quality level, how to like integrate the people, how to work with different cultures, because we have 7 different countries. Some countries have a similar culture, but then there are countries with a very, very different culture. So comparing the Austrian culture to the Russian culture, that's something which you can't compare. It's like the Austrian culture is much more German, and the Russian culture, of course, is its own culture. So this is you have to be really, really careful on how to do things. So because people can block things, people can block innovation just because of cultural reasons, not because of technical barriers. So getting the employees to buy in is a very, very challenging part. On the one hand side, you need to be sure or you need to be aware of to have the best people in terms of technology, so that nobody can attack you in terms of having the architecture and the technology right. This must be set, and then you must be convincing. And the thing is, I'm reporting to the board level, but coming with the hierarchy never works. You can tell people what they have to do, but they will just do it with resistance, and this never works. So you really need to convince. And this is really a hard part of the work, to convince people to go for new approaches in terms of data handling, in terms of data science, in terms of data governance, how this is done. This is there's so many different approaches to it, and you need to combine all different measures, like having communities, establishing communities throughout the countries. That's what we did. Having the expert communities where our top experts from the countries, as Spock for each country, are being placed, similar to how Ricky was saying it. Working with them closely, and then having the management buy-in as well. So we're having a data governance, a data council, where all major countries take part, where the management of the major countries are taking part, like the chief operating officers or the chief information officers, and to have them constantly updated and constantly have their buy-in for the different topics, and having the different corporate functions involved. So for instance, if you're talking to a marketing person, the marketing person per se are very deep into and have a really good knowledge about data. But if you're talking to HR, they have limited know-how about data, but you also need to get their buy-in. So you need to talk to them in different languages, I would say, not languages in terms of English, German, or whatever. It's just like how deep you go into technology, but and how you explain it. So this is I really love this part of my job, but it's really challenging. It's not technology. You simply can't program people. You have to trigger them different.
Rob, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, and like we see it all the time, like engineering, marketing teams, different geographies, they disagree on a lot of things, but I think thankfully the one thing they do agree on is that like the garbage in like leads to garbage out. So if anything, it's just helped create shared alignment on importance of data quality. And like what we've seen our customers do, obviously we're providing some technology, but it's all around technology, people, and process to make sure the project is really successful in the long run. But we just want to make it as easy as possible for them. So be that having common data dictionaries that people can see in tools. So if it's an engineer, we can put it into their CLI. If it's for marketing teams, they can see it in a Google Doc, but having it all in the same place, so they know like what this event is, what it's tracking, and where it's being sent to. But then also when there are data quality issues, like just helping the engineers like get to the bottom of it, not just saying that we've got a problem with these 5 events, can you figure it out? Like, you know, actually being a little bit more detailed, like it's coming from this version of iOS and it's this many occurrences, etc. And then finally, like, I know it might be a little bit of a, it seems too good to be true, but just like getting them bought into it. Like we've seen so many engineers use our technology, they save thousands of hours across their teams, and it means they're actually able to go build things and be creative, as engineers typically like to be. So yeah, I think what we've seen is just start small. If you get one team on board and then just they see the benefits and then just continue to iterate from there.
Brilliant, thank you, Rob. So we've talked a little bit there about high quality data. What kind of advice or tips do you have for people to ensure that the data that they are using is high quality? Mario, do you have any tips?
Sorry, can you repeat? I lost the connection.
Yeah, of course. So it was around the point on high quality data. So what kind of advice do you have for our members who might be wanting to explore whether their data is high quality, and how can they go about that?
I mean, this is a very tough question, of course, because there is no silver bullet, because you have to treat each data set different. I mean, you have to ensure a couple of metrics on data. So you need to have this kind of description. What is data quality, in our opinion? So, for instance, when was the data last updated? This is key and vital. How is how many fields are missing in each data set? How accurate is the data? So there are quite a lot of governance aspects how to measure data quality. And this really depends on a use case. So for instance, if you want to do a real-time marketing campaign and your data has been last refreshed half a year ago, it might be bad quality for that. If you're doing like a backwards looking claims analysis, it might be sufficient to have the data last updated a month ago. For a marketing campaign, this would be probably bad quality. So it really depends on the use case you want to drive and what kind of quality metrics you would expect. So the key thing is to have metrics in place, like the metric could be probably last update to the data. And then you can decide based on the use case, is the data quality right for me for this specific use case, or is it not sufficient? Then you have to work onto it. So it's really tailored to each use case. And that's the important thing about data, that data is so much in motion that you simply can't say, okay, now it's at a good quality. Now it's how I would like to have it, because as soon as you have a good quality, the requirements might have changed. Data is always in motion. This is what you have to keep in mind. It's constantly evolving.
I think your point there, Mario, about when was it last updated? I mean, data provenance tends to be an area where you can at least be more specific and have some consistent fields about where, where did this come from? Who's QA'd it? What's the process that's gone through? And what's the date of that? Date of the data generation, date of QA, and date of sort of entry into whatever store or silo.
The lineage especially.
And if you understand that data lineage, then there's a load of other stuff coming back to, you mentioned accuracy. I mean, accuracy is obviously means a lot of different things, different data sets. So, we use the sort of, more of a probability score from sort of, almost 0 to 100% of if you like, our certainty around how accurate the data was, rather than a sort of data accuracy, because it means, in a data set where you're talking in, tiny fractions of a percent, what accuracy, is very different from something that's measured in billions, and equally that could be, percentages might not even work in certain instances. So, but it, yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and equally for different use cases for the data, the actual requirements are completely different as well. So, getting your accounts right. Yeah, in a bank, if you lose money, if some money goes astray in your accounts, that real money sort of ceases to exist in the world, because the only place that your money is kept as a bank is actually on your computer systems. So there's no you're not passing it on to anyone else. So losing £1 billion just literally means £1 billion evaporating from the money supply, and from you very particularly. So yeah, it's best not to do that.
Okay, so we're nearly out of time. I want to finish up by asking each of you, what do you see as the next disruptive trend in data? Rob, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of disruptive trends, but I think we all need to go through like a process. I think at the moment, most organizations are still data wrangling, and that's obviously been a key point of the conversation today. So what we see is like data wrangling. Then I think that leads to very good use cases for ML and AI once we've got the data in a format and in a way that's got good reliability, where we're going to be able to trust the outcomes of the models. And then further on from that, I see there being a lot of autonomy to help with things like self-governance, maybe having things like adaptive connectors and so on. So I think those are the three phases we see organizations going through, but most are still in the data wrangling phase.
Thank you. Ricky, what do you see as the disruptive trend?
I mean, God, it just gives me like a really boring answer. Like everyone talks about AI in whenever anybody asks for anything new and innovative. I mean, and yet it's been around since the 70s. I do think that and the shift from from ML, which a lot of businesses are using, but within some of those silos and without. The shift from that to deep learning, where the machine's able to monitor your data, potentially the machine's able to take on some of these tasks that we discussed around, around meta-taking, around automating the tracking of lineage, around actually testing which of these variables work within models. That was something we'd begun to use at Tandem, and I think is a really exciting opportunity to solve some of these problems, which ultimately end up costing an awful lot of human effort. Could potentially be be executed by machines. They're very much sort of machine suitable jobs, if you like, and I don't think anyone will miss the jobs particularly. So yeah, that's the I think probably the biggest opportunity for that to actually start happening and people stop talking about it.
Interesting. Mario's nodding his head. Do you agree, Mario? Do you have another trend?
I mean, I would agree with both Rob and Ricky. So basically what Ricky was stating really correct is that a lot of the deep learning topics could be automated. And what Rob was stating, that we are really busy with data wrangling. I think both are connected really well, because what I would say is for the last 5 years, we were preaching become a data scientist because it's a cool job to do. I would say the cool job, the important job is around data wrangling, so data engineering. This is what we hopefully soon figure out, because that's where we have the real problems of finding qualified people and finding a lot of people, and where we have the demand. I do believe that the data science, machine learning, AI topics, that there is not so much work eventually to do, because a lot of that can be automated in the future. And if you look at auto ML toolings coming out, I think this is one of the big trends that we now figure out. It's about the governance, and it's about the, as Rob stated, the garbage in, garbage out to have a certain quality. I think this is probably not a big trend or disruptive trend, but it's that we figure out that this is actually the place where we have to fix our topics first. And then I would say, as a trend, maybe not disruptive, is figuring also out that the centralization of data is giving some issues in large companies, so that we have to go on a distributed architecture. Especially, I want to mention here again data mesh as this architectural concept, that this is the way forward. And I see a lot of companies now moving towards the data mesh, and I would say this is a trend. I don't know if it's disruptive. I would say it's probably an evolution, but not necessarily a revolution.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. So we're out of time, unfortunately. I think we could, go on talking about silos and everything else. But unfortunately, we have no more time for the discussion now. So thank you, Rob, Ricky, and Mario, for your invaluable insights. And of course, thank you to our audience for joining us today.